Sarah Chen had always been small. At 5 feet 2 and barely weighing 110 pounds, she looked more like a college student than a military medic. Her fellow soldiers often joked that a strong wind could blow her away. When she first arrived at Forward Operating Base Kilo in Afghanistan, the gruff sergeant took one look at her and shook his head. "Another one who won't last a week," he muttered to his buddy. Sarah pretended not to hear. She had heard it all before during her training. The instructors had questioned whether she could carry the heavy medical equipment. Her classmates wondered if she could handle the physical demands of combat medicine. Even her own family had expressed doubts when she announced her decision to become a field medic. But Sarah had something that couldn't be measured by a scale or a tape measure. She had an unbreakable determination that burned inside her like a small but fierce flame. Growing up as the youngest of 4 children in a working-class family, she had learned early that being underestimated could actually be an advantage. While others focused on her size, she focused on her skills. The base was located in one of the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan. Surrounded by rocky mountains and narrow valleys, it served as a crucial outpost for monitoring enemy activity. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, with temperatures that could swing from scorching hot during the day to freezing cold at night. Dust seemed to coat everything, and the constant threat of enemy fire kept everyone on edge. Sarah's first few weeks at the base were challenging in ways she hadn't expected. It wasn't just the physical conditions or the danger that tested her. It was the constant need to prove herself to her fellow soldiers. Every time she struggled to carry her medical pack up a steep hill, someone would offer to help with a patronizing smile. When she took a little longer to set up her equipment during training exercises, she could see the doubt in their eyes. The medical tent where Sarah worked was a stark reminder of the reality of war. Rows of cots lined the space, each one potentially needed at a moment's notice. The smell of antiseptic couldn't quite mask the underlying odors of dust, sweat, and fear. Medical supplies were organized with military precision, but Sarah knew that in an emergency, organization could quickly turn to chaos. Her supervising medic, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, was a 20-year veteran who had seen more wounded soldiers than he cared to remember. He was tough but fair, and he didn't seem to care about Sarah's size as long as she could do her job. During their first week together, he put her through a series of practical tests that would determine whether she was ready for real combat situations. "Size doesn't matter if you know what you're doing," Rodriguez told her after she successfully treated a simulated chest wound. "But knowledge without courage is useless out there. The real test comes when the bullets start flying." Sarah's first real emergency came 3 weeks after her arrival. A patrol had encountered an improvised explosive device, and 2 soldiers were injured. As the helicopter brought them in, Sarah felt her heart racing. This wasn't a training exercise with fake wounds and staged scenarios. These were real soldiers with real injuries that could mean the difference between life and death. The first soldier had shrapnel wounds to his legs and arms. The injuries looked worse than they were, with lots of blood but no major damage to vital organs or arteries. Sarah worked quickly and efficiently, cleaning the wounds and applying bandages while monitoring his vital signs. Her small hands were actually an advantage as she carefully removed small pieces of metal from between his fingers. The second soldier was more seriously injured. The explosion had thrown him against a rock wall, and he had suffered a concussion along with possible internal injuries. Sarah had to make quick decisions about his treatment while preparing him for transport to a larger medical facility. Her training kicked in automatically, and she found herself moving with a confidence that surprised even her. "Good work, Chen," Rodriguez said quietly as they watched the medical helicopter disappear into the distance. "You stayed calm under pressure. That's the most important skill a medic can have." But not everyone was impressed. Private Martinez, a muscular soldier from Texas, made it clear that he still had doubts about Sarah's abilities. "It's easy to patch up someone in a nice clean medical tent," he said loudly enough for others to hear. "The real test is out in the field when you're under fire and have to carry someone to safety." Martinez wasn't trying to be cruel. Like many soldiers, he had seen medics freeze up during combat. He had watched as injured soldiers died because their medic couldn't handle the pressure or the physical demands of battlefield medicine. In his mind, Sarah's small size was a liability that could cost lives. Sarah understood his concerns, even if she didn't appreciate how he expressed them. She knew that many soldiers shared his doubts. They saw her struggling with her heavy medical pack during long marches, and they wondered if she could perform when lives were on the line. She could see it in their eyes during briefings and training exercises. The base commander, Colonel Williams, was a practical man who cared more about results than appearances. He had served with female soldiers before and had learned not to judge capabilities by size or gender. But he also understood the concerns of his men. Unit cohesion and trust were crucial in combat situations, and doubt about any team member could be dangerous. During a staff meeting, Williams addressed the issue directly. "I don't care if a medic is 6 feet tall or 5 feet tall, male or female, as long as they can save lives. But everyone needs to trust their medic completely. That trust has to be earned through performance, not just credentials." Sarah knew she was being watched and evaluated constantly. Every training exercise, every medical emergency, every interaction with her fellow soldiers was a test. She had to prove not just that she could do the job, but that she could do it better than anyone expected. The pressure was enormous, but she channeled it into motivation. She spent extra hours studying medical procedures and practicing with her equipment. She worked out religiously, not to bulk up, but to build the endurance and functional strength she would need in the field. She volunteered for extra duties and made herself available whenever medical assistance was needed, no matter how minor the issue. Gradually, some of her fellow soldiers began to see past her size. Corporal Johnson, who had initially been skeptical, came to appreciate her attention to detail and gentle bedside manner. "She makes me feel like I'm being treated by my mom instead of some army doctor," he joked after Sarah treated a minor infection on his hand. But the real test that everyone was waiting for hadn't come yet. Sarah had proven she could handle medical emergencies in the relative safety of the base, but combat medicine was entirely different. In the field, medics often had to work while under enemy fire, in terrible conditions, and with limited resources. They sometimes had to carry wounded soldiers to safety, while navigating dangerous terrain and avoiding enemy positions. The opportunity to prove herself came sooner than anyone expected. Intelligence reports indicated increased enemy activity in a valley about 10 miles from the base. A patrol was being organized to investigate, and they would need a medic. Rodriguez was scheduled to go, but he had come down with a severe stomach bug that left him bedridden. "Chen will have to take his place," Colonel Williams announced during the briefing. Sarah felt every eye in the room turn toward her. She could sense the mixture of concern and skepticism from the soldiers who would be depending on her. Private Martinez shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly unhappy with the decision. Even some of the officers looked uncertain. "Sir, maybe we should wait for Rodriguez to recover," suggested Lieutenant Thompson, the patrol leader. "Negative. Intelligence says the enemy activity is happening now. We can't wait. Chen is qualified and she's going." Williams's tone made it clear the decision was final. After the briefing, Sarah felt the weight of everyone's expectations and doubts. She double-checked her medical supplies, ensuring she had everything she might need for treating various types of injuries. Her pack felt heavier than usual, weighted down not just with equipment but with the knowledge that soldiers' lives might depend on her performance. That evening, as she prepared for the mission, Sarah called her mother using the base's communication system. She couldn't tell her family about the specific mission, but she needed to hear a familiar voice. "You sound nervous, honey," her mother said from their home in California. "I'm fine, Mom, just missing everyone. Remember what your grandmother used to say. It's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. You've got plenty of fight in you, Sarah. Trust yourself." After the call, Sarah sat alone in her bunk, looking at a photo of her family. Her parents had always supported her dreams, even when they worried about her safety. Her 3 older brothers had taught her to be tough and never give up. They had never treated her differently because she was small or female, and their confidence in her had helped build her own self-confidence. The night before the patrol, Sarah barely slept. She went over every possible medical scenario in her mind, reviewing procedures and thinking about how she would handle different types of injuries in field conditions. She checked and rechecked her equipment, making sure everything was properly organized and easily accessible. As dawn approached, she could hear the other soldiers preparing for the mission. The sound of equipment being checked, weapons being cleaned, and quiet conversations filled the air. Everyone was nervous, but they had learned to channel that nervousness into focused preparation. When she joined the patrol for final preparations, Sarah noticed that the atmosphere was tense but professional. These were experienced soldiers who understood the dangers they were facing. They might have doubts about their medic, but they would follow orders and complete their mission. Private Martinez approached her as she adjusted her medical pack. For a moment, she thought he was going to say something discouraging, but instead he offered advice. Remember to stay low when we're moving through the valley. The enemy likes to position snipers on the high ground, and if someone gets hit, don't be a hero. Get them to cover first, then worry about treatment. Sarah nodded, appreciating the guidance even though it came from someone who had expressed doubts about her abilities. Thanks, Martinez. I'll remember that. Lieutenant Thompson gathered the patrol for a final briefing. 8 soldiers plus Sarah would be making the journey into the valley. Their mission was to investigate reports of enemy weapon caches and gather intelligence on recent activity. They would be inserted by helicopter and would have to march back to base, a distance of approximately 6 miles through difficult terrain. Stay alert, stay together, and follow procedures, Thompson emphasized. We don't know exactly what we're walking into, but we know it's not going to be easy. As they prepared to board the helicopter, Sarah felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. This was what she had trained for, what she had dreamed of since deciding to become a military medic. All the doubts and skepticism from others, all her own fears and insecurities, would be put to the test in the next few hours. The helicopter ride to the insertion point was loud and turbulent. Sarah focused on her breathing and tried to stay calm. She could see the faces of her fellow soldiers, each one dealing with pre-mission nerves in their own way. Some checked their weapons repeatedly, others stared out the windows at the passing landscape, and a few closed their eyes and tried to rest. The valley where they would be operating was known for its strategic importance and its danger. Enemy forces used the area to move supplies and personnel, and several previous patrols had encountered resistance. The terrain was challenging, with rocky outcroppings, steep slopes, and limited cover. It was exactly the kind of environment where a small medic might struggle to keep up with larger, stronger soldiers. As the helicopter prepared to land, Sarah made a silent promise to herself and to the soldiers depending on her. She would prove that size didn't matter, that determination and skill could overcome physical limitations. She would show everyone, including herself, that they had been wrong to doubt her. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and noise. Within seconds, the soldiers were out and moving toward their first objective. Sarah followed her medical pack bouncing against her back as she tried to keep pace with the longer strides of her teammates. The mission had begun, and with it, Sarah's chance to prove herself once and for all. She had no way of knowing that within hours, she would face a test that would change not only how others saw her, but how she saw herself. The valley ahead held challenges that would push her far beyond anything she had experienced in training or in her previous medical emergencies. But as she moved through the dust and heat, following the patrol deeper into dangerous territory, Sarah felt ready for whatever lay ahead. She had spent her entire life being underestimated, and she had learned to use that as motivation rather than discouragement. Today, she would find out if all her preparation and determination would be enough when everything was on the line. The morning air was crisp and thin as the patrol moved through the rocky terrain of the Afghan valley. Sarah had been walking for 2 hours, and despite her training, she could feel the strain in her legs and shoulders. The medical pack loaded with trauma supplies, IV bags, and emergency medications seemed to grow heavier with each step, but she kept pace with the team, determined not to show any signs of weakness. Sergeant Kelly, the patrol's second-in-command, had been watching Sarah carefully since they left the landing zone. He had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and had seen plenty of medics struggle with the physical demands of field operations. But so far, Chen was holding her own. She hadn't complained once, hadn't asked for help, and hadn't fallen behind. He was beginning to think that maybe the colonel's confidence in her wasn't misplaced. The patrol moved in a tactical formation through the narrow valley, with scouts ahead and rear guards watching for any signs of enemy activity. The landscape was deceptively beautiful, with rugged mountains rising on both sides and scattered patches of green vegetation near a small stream. But everyone knew that beauty could be deadly in this part of Afghanistan. The rocky outcroppings and caves provided perfect hiding spots for snipers and ambush teams. Lieutenant Thompson signaled for a brief rest after they had covered about 3 miles. The soldiers found whatever shade they could and checked their equipment. Sarah used the opportunity to redistribute the weight in her medical pack and drink some water. The thin air at this altitude made everything more difficult, and she needed to stay hydrated. Private Martinez sat down near her during the break. "How you holding up, Doc?" he asked, using the nickname that medics earned regardless of their actual medical training. "I'm fine," Sarah replied, grateful that his tone was more concerned than skeptical now. "The altitude is a bit of a challenge, but nothing I can't handle." "Good, because according to the map, the really difficult part is still ahead. We'll be climbing up toward that ridge." He pointed to a steep, rocky slope that rose several hundred feet above their current position. "That's where intelligence says the enemy has been most active." Sarah looked at the challenging terrain ahead and felt her stomach tighten slightly. The climb would test everyone's physical limits, but it would be especially difficult for someone of her size carrying a heavy medical pack. She knew that some of the soldiers were still waiting for her to prove herself, and this might be their first real test of her capabilities. As they resumed their movement, the patrol began the steep climb toward the ridge. The path was little more than a goat trail, winding between boulders and across loose scree that threatened to slide away under their boots. Sarah found herself breathing harder and had to focus on each step to maintain her footing. Corporal Jackson, a tall soldier from Minnesota, was climbing directly behind Sarah. He had been one of the more skeptical voices back at base, questioning whether someone her size could handle the physical demands of field medicine. But as he watched her navigate the difficult terrain without complaint, his opinion was beginning to change. "Need a hand with that pack?" Jackson offered when they stopped at a particularly challenging section of the climb. Sarah considered the offer for a moment. Pride told her to refuse, but practical thinking reminded her that this wasn't about proving she could do everything alone. It was about being effective as part of a team. "Thanks, but I'm managing okay. If I need help, I'll ask." Her response was friendly but firm, and Jackson respected her for it. The climb took nearly an hour, and by the time they reached the ridge, everyone was tired and sweating despite the cool mountain air. But they had reached their primary observation point, and Lieutenant Thompson was pleased with their progress. From this vantage point, they could see for miles in every direction and had a clear view of the areas where enemy activity had been reported. Using binoculars and specialized surveillance equipment, the patrol began their intelligence-gathering mission. They documented vehicle tracks, identified possible weapons caches, and noted signs of recent human activity in the valley below. Sarah used this time to rest and check her medical supplies, making sure everything was still properly organized after the difficult climb. For the first few hours on the ridge, everything went according to plan. The soldiers rotated between observation duties and rest periods, and Sarah helped treat minor injuries like scraped knees and strained muscles that had resulted from the climb. Her confidence grew as she handled these routine medical tasks efficiently and professionally, but their relatively peaceful mission was about to change dramatically. Around midday, Specialist Davis, who was monitoring radio communications, picked up enemy chatter on his electronic surveillance equipment. The voices were speaking in the local dialect, but the tone and urgency suggested they were discussing the American patrol. "Lieutenant," Davis called quietly, "we've got enemy communications. Sounds like they know we're here." Thompson moved quickly to assess the situation. The enemy chatter was increasing, and it seemed to be coming from multiple locations. Worse, the communications suggested that enemy forces were moving to surround their position on the ridge. "Pack it up," Thompson ordered. "We need to move to our extraction point immediately." The patrol began preparing for a rapid departure, but their situation was already becoming dangerous. Through his binoculars, Sergeant Kelly spotted movement in the rocks below their position. Armed figures were moving through the terrain they had just climbed, effectively cutting off their most direct route back to base. "Contact front," Kelly announced, his voice calm but urgent. "Multiple enemy personnel moving to our 6 o'clock position." Sarah felt her heart rate spike as she realized their peaceful intelligence mission had just become a combat operation. She had trained for this scenario countless times, but the reality was different from any exercise. The danger was real, the consequences were real, and her fellow soldiers were depending on her to perform under pressure. Thompson quickly assessed their tactical situation. The enemy was moving to surround them, but there was still a narrow corridor to the north that appeared to be clear. If they moved fast and stayed ahead of the enemy forces, they might be able to reach their extraction point without a major engagement. "We're moving north along the ridge to secondary extraction," Thompson announced. "Stay low, move fast, and watch for enemy positions." The patrol began moving along the ridgeline, using the rocky terrain for cover. Sarah struggled to keep up with the increased pace while carrying her heavy medical pack, but adrenaline helped override her fatigue. Behind them, she could hear voices and occasional sounds of movement as enemy forces continued to close in. They had been moving for about 20 minutes when the first shots rang out. High-powered rifle rounds cracked through the air above their heads, sending rock chips flying as bullets struck the stones around them. Someone behind them had finally gotten within range and was attempting to pin them down. "Contact rear!" Sergeant Kelly shouted. "Sniper fire from approximately 800 meters. The patrol immediately took cover behind the available rocks and returned fire. Sarah found herself pressed against a large boulder, her medical pack making it difficult to get low enough for adequate protection. This was her first experience with actual enemy fire, and the sound of bullets passing overhead was terrifying in a way that no training exercise could replicate. "Chen, stay down and stay ready," Lieutenant Thompson called to her. "If anyone gets hit, we need you mobile and ready to move." For the next few minutes, the patrol exchanged sporadic fire with the enemy sniper while continuing to move toward their extraction point. The situation was tense but manageable, as long as they could stay ahead of the larger enemy force that was trying to surround them. But their luck was about to run out. As they moved around a large outcropping of rock, they walked directly into an ambush that had been set up by a second enemy team. Automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions, and the patrol found themselves caught in a deadly crossfire. "Ambush front!" someone screamed as bullets began flying from every direction. The soldiers dove for cover wherever they could find it, but the enemy had chosen their position well. There was limited protection available, and the patrol was exposed from multiple angles. Sarah found herself behind a low rock wall that provided minimal cover, with enemy fire passing both above and to either side of her position. Within seconds of the ambush beginning, Sarah heard the sound that every medic dreads most. "Medic! Medic! Man down!" Through the chaos of gunfire and shouting, she could see Private Martinez lying in the open about 30 feet from her position. He had been hit while trying to reach better cover, and was calling for help while enemy bullets continued to snap through the air around him. Sarah's training took over automatically. She assessed the situation quickly, noting the enemy fire patterns and identifying the safest route to reach the wounded soldier. But even the safest route would require her to cross open ground while under direct enemy fire. "I see him," she called back to Lieutenant Thompson. "I'm going to get him." "Negative, Chen. Too much fire. Wait for us to suppress the enemy positions." But Sarah could see that Martinez was bleeding heavily and might not survive if treatment was delayed. She made the decision that would define her career and possibly her life. Leaving her large medical pack behind, but keeping essential trauma supplies, she sprinted toward Martinez while bullets cracked through the air around her. The 30-foot run felt like 30 miles. Sarah had never moved so fast in her life, driven by pure adrenaline and the knowledge that a fellow soldier's life depended on her reaching him. She could hear bullets hitting the ground near her feet and whistling past her head, but she focused entirely on reaching Martinez. She slid into position next to the wounded soldier, just as a burst of automatic fire chewed up the ground where she had been standing a moment before. Martinez had been hit in the leg and shoulder, and blood was spreading across his uniform, but he was conscious and able to communicate. "Doc, I can't feel my leg," Martinez said, his voice strained with pain and fear. "I've got you," Sarah replied, already beginning her assessment of his injuries. "You're going to be fine, but I need you to stay calm and do exactly what I tell you." Working under enemy fire was unlike anything Sarah had experienced before. Every few seconds, she had to duck as bullets passed overhead or struck nearby rocks, but she forced herself to focus on treating Martinez's wounds, while the rest of the patrol continued to fight the enemy forces. The leg wound was serious, but not immediately life-threatening. The bullet had passed through the muscle tissue without hitting any major blood vessels or bones. The shoulder wound was more concerning, as it appeared the bullet might still be lodged inside and could be affecting his mobility. "Thompson," Sarah called over the noise of the firefight, "Martinez needs immediate evacuation. I can stabilize him here, but he needs surgery." "Working on it," the lieutenant responded while firing at an enemy position. "Medical evacuation helicopter is 30 minutes out." 30 minutes seemed like an eternity while lying in the open under enemy fire. Sarah continued working on Martinez's wounds, applying pressure bandages and starting an IV line to replace lost fluids. Her small size was actually an advantage in this situation, as she could work while staying lower to the ground and presenting a smaller target to enemy shooters. But the situation was about to get much worse. A loud explosion echoed across the ridge as an enemy rocket-propelled grenade struck near the patrol's position. The blast sent rock fragments flying and temporarily disrupted the Americans' return fire. "RPG! RPG!" someone shouted as another rocket streaked toward their position. This second rocket exploded much closer, and Sarah felt the shockwave wash over her. When the dust and debris settled, she realized that 2 more soldiers had been wounded by the blast. Corporal Jackson and Specialist Davis were both down and calling for medical assistance. Sarah found herself facing an impossible situation. She had 1 wounded soldier, partially treated but still in need of immediate care. 2 more soldiers had just been injured and required attention. All 3 wounded men were scattered across the battleground with enemy fire continuing to pour down on their position. "Chen, we've got multiple casualties," Sergeant Kelly shouted. "Jackson and Davis are both hit." Sarah looked at the tactical situation and realized she would have to make multiple trips across open ground under enemy fire to treat all the wounded soldiers. It was exactly the kind of scenario that everyone had worried about when questioning whether someone her size could handle combat medicine. But Sarah didn't hesitate. After ensuring that Martinez was stable for the moment, she gathered essential medical supplies and began planning her route to the next wounded soldier. The enemy fire was still intense, but she had already proven to herself that she could move under fire and reach wounded soldiers. "Cover me," she called to the unwounded members of the patrol. "I'm going for Jackson." The remaining soldiers intensified their return fire, trying to suppress the enemy positions while Sarah made her second dangerous run across the battleground. This time she had to cover even more open ground, and the enemy seemed to be specifically targeting her movement. Bullets kicked up dirt all around her as she sprinted and dove toward Jackson's position. She could hear the distinctive crack of rifle rounds passing close to her head, but she kept moving forward, driven by the knowledge that wounded soldiers were depending on her. Jackson had been hit in the chest by shrapnel from the rocket explosion. He was conscious but having trouble breathing, which suggested possible lung damage. Sarah immediately began assessing his condition while trying to stay low enough to avoid the continuing enemy fire. "Doc, I can't breathe right," Jackson gasped. "I know. I'm going to take care of that," Sarah responded, her voice calm and professional despite the chaos around them. Working quickly, Sarah determined that Jackson had a pneumothorax, a collapsed lung caused by the chest wound. This was a life-threatening condition that required immediate treatment. While bullets continued to fly overhead, she prepared to perform a needle decompression, a procedure that would allow the trapped air to escape and let Jackson's lung re-expand. The procedure required steady hands and precise positioning, which was extremely difficult while lying on rocky ground under enemy fire. But Sarah's training took over, and she successfully completed the needle decompression. Jackson's breathing immediately improved, and color began returning to his face. "Better?" she asked. "Much better. Thanks, Doc." But Sarah's work was far from over. Specialist Davis was still wounded and waiting for treatment, and she needed to get back to check on Martinez's condition. The enemy fire showed no signs of decreasing, and the promised medical evacuation helicopter was still 20 minutes away. As Sarah prepared for her 3rd trip across the battleground, she realized that the situation had become a test not just of her medical skills, but of her physical and mental endurance. She was already exhausted from treating 2 seriously wounded soldiers under combat conditions, and she still had more work to do. The other members of the patrol were amazed by what they were witnessing. Private Martinez, despite his own wounds, watched in awe as the tiny medic who everyone had doubted risked her life repeatedly to save her fellow soldiers. Even Sergeant Kelly, who had seen combat medics in action many times before, was impressed by Sarah's courage and determination. "That little girl has more heart than some guys twice her size," Kelly muttered to himself as he continued firing at enemy positions. Sarah gathered her supplies one more time and prepared to reach Davis. The enemy fire seemed to intensify as she moved, suggesting that they had identified her as a priority target, but she knew that Davis was wounded and waiting for help, and nothing was going to stop her from reaching him. This third run across the battleground would prove to be the most dangerous yet. The enemy had adjusted their fire patterns and were now concentrating on the area where the wounded soldiers were located. Sarah would have to cross through the heaviest concentration of enemy fire she had faced so far, but as she prepared to move, Sarah felt a calm determination settle over her. She had already proven to herself and to her fellow soldiers that size didn't matter when courage and skill were on the line. Now she was about to face the ultimate test of everything she had trained for and everything she believed about herself. Sarah crouched behind the rocky outcropping, her heart pounding as she prepared for her third dash across the killing zone. Specialist Davis lay wounded about 40 feet away, the farthest distance she would have to cover yet. Through the dust and smoke of battle, she could see him trying to wave at her with one arm, while holding his wounded side with the other. The enemy fire had become more concentrated and accurate as the fighters above them adjusted their positions. They had clearly identified the medic as a priority target, understanding that eliminating her would mean the wounded American soldiers would receive no treatment. Sarah could hear bullets striking the rocks around her position with increasing frequency. "Chen, that's too far," Lieutenant Thompson shouted over the gunfire. "The enemy has that area zeroed in. Wait for the helicopter gunships." "Davis can't wait," Sarah called back, checking her medical supplies one final time. "He's losing too much blood." Through her binoculars, she had seen the dark stains spreading across Davis's uniform, indicating serious internal bleeding that would be fatal without immediate intervention. Every minute of delay increased the chance that she would reach him too late to save his life. Sergeant Kelly provided covering fire as Sarah exploded from her position, running in a zigzag pattern to make herself a more difficult target. The enemy response was immediate and intense. Automatic weapon fire stitched across the ground behind her, and she could hear the distinctive whistle of bullets passing within inches of her body. Halfway to Davis's position, a sniper's bullet struck the rock just in front of her, sending sharp fragments into her face and arms. Sarah felt the sting of the stone cuts but kept running, driven by pure adrenaline and determination. She dove and rolled the final 10 feet, sliding into cover beside the wounded soldier just as a burst of machine gun fire chewed up the ground where she had been standing. "About time, Doc," Davis managed to say through gritted teeth, his attempt at humor not quite hiding his pain and fear. "Sorry for the delay." "Traffic was murder," Sarah replied, already beginning her assessment of his wounds. Davis had been hit by multiple shrapnel fragments from the rocket explosion. His most serious wound was in his abdomen, where a large piece of metal had penetrated deeply and was causing significant internal bleeding. Sarah realized immediately that this was beyond her ability to treat in the field. Davis needed emergency surgery and he needed it soon, but she could stabilize him and keep him alive until evacuation arrived. Working with practiced efficiency despite the continuing enemy fire, Sarah started an IV line and began administering fluids to combat shock. She applied pressure dressings to the external wounds and carefully positioned Davis to minimize further injury. "How bad is it, Doc?" Davis asked, his voice getting weaker. "You're going to be fine," Sarah lied smoothly, not wanting him to know how serious his condition really was. "Just need to get you back home for some proper medical attention." While treating Davis, Sarah could hear the radio chatter between Lieutenant Thompson and the incoming medical evacuation helicopter. The pilot was reporting difficulty finding a safe landing zone due to the intense enemy fire. Without helicopter evacuation, there was no way to get the wounded soldiers the advanced medical care they needed. "Dustoff 7-2, this is Bravo 6, Thompson radioed. "We have 3 urgent casualties requiring immediate evacuation. Can you attempt landing at the primary LZ? "Negative, Bravo 6. "Taking heavy fire at the primary zone. Need you to mark an alternative LZ and provide suppression of enemy fire." Sarah realized that even if she could keep the wounded soldiers alive, evacuation was becoming increasingly unlikely. The enemy had positioned themselves to control all the obvious helicopter landing zones, and the patrol didn't have enough firepower to clear them all out. As she worked on Davis, Sarah became aware that the enemy fire patterns were changing. Instead of random shooting designed to pin down the entire patrol, the enemy seemed to be concentrating their efforts on specific areas. She realized with growing concern that they were preparing for a ground assault to finish off the trapped American soldiers. "Lieutenant," Sergeant Kelly called out, "I'm seeing movement downslope. Looks like they're getting ready to rush our position." Thompson assessed their tactical situation quickly. With 3 wounded soldiers scattered across the battleground and limited ammunition remaining, the patrol was in serious danger of being overrun. They needed to consolidate their position and prepare for close combat. All unwounded personnel fall back to defensive positions around the wounded. Prepare for ground assault. But this created a new problem for Sarah. Her 3 patients were spread across 30 feet of open ground, too far apart for the remaining soldiers to defend effectively. Someone would have to move the wounded soldiers, and Sarah was the only one small enough to drag them without making herself an easy target. "I can move them," Sarah announced, her voice carrying clearly over the noise of battle. "I can drag them, one at a time, to a more defensible position." "Negative, Chen," Thompson responded immediately. "You're not strong enough to drag a full-grown soldier while under fire." "I can do it," Sarah insisted. "I'm small enough to stay low while moving them. It's our only option." The debate was settled when enemy fighters began advancing down the slope toward their position. Sarah could see armed figures moving from rock to rock, getting closer with each bound. In minutes, they would be close enough for accurate aimed fire, making any movement across the battleground impossible. Sarah made the decision that would define not just her military career, but her entire understanding of her own capabilities. Without waiting for permission, she grabbed Martinez by his tactical vest and began dragging him toward the more defensible position where the other soldiers were gathering. Martinez was nearly twice her weight and was encumbered by his equipment and weapons. Under normal circumstances, Sarah wouldn't have been able to move him more than a few feet. But adrenaline, determination, and desperation gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. Staying as low as possible, Sarah pulled Martinez across the rocky ground while enemy bullets cracked overhead. Martinez tried to help by pushing with his good leg, but his injuries limited what he could contribute. The movement was slow and painful for both of them, but they gradually covered the distance to relative safety. "How the hell did you do that?" Martinez gasped as they reached cover. "I have no idea," Sarah admitted, already preparing for her second rescue. The enemy fighters were getting closer, and their fire was becoming more accurate. Sarah realized she had only minutes before the advancing enemy would make any movement impossible. She had to reach Jackson and Davis quickly, or they would all be trapped in their current positions when the enemy assault reached them. Jackson was closer, so Sarah went for him next. His chest wound made movement painful and difficult, but he was conscious and able to help somewhat. Together, they made the dangerous journey back to the defensive position, with Jackson crawling and Sarah pulling him when necessary. "One more," Sarah announced as she prepared to retrieve Davis. But Specialist Davis was the farthest away and the most seriously wounded. He had lost consciousness from blood loss and couldn't assist in his own movement. Sarah would have to drag his dead weight across open ground while enemy fighters closed in from multiple directions. "Chen, there's no time," Sergeant Kelly warned. "The enemy is almost in grenade range." Sarah looked at Davis's motionless form and made a decision that went against every survival instinct she possessed. She couldn't leave a fellow soldier behind, no matter what the odds. Gathering her remaining strength, she sprinted across the open ground one final time. The enemy response was immediate and overwhelming. Automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions as they realized the American medic was attempting another rescue. Bullets struck all around Sarah as she reached Davis's position, but somehow none found their mark. Davis was completely unconscious and bleeding severely. Sarah grabbed him by his equipment straps and began the most difficult drag of her life. He was the largest of the 3 wounded soldiers, and his unconscious body was completely limp and heavy. Every step was a struggle, and enemy fire was getting closer and more accurate. Halfway back to the defensive position, Sarah's strength began to fail. Her legs were shaking with exhaustion, her arms burned from the effort of dragging Davis, and her lungs struggled to get enough oxygen in the thin mountain air. She was beginning to doubt whether she could complete this final rescue. But then she heard the voices of her fellow soldiers encouraging her from their defensive positions. "Come on, Doc. You can do it. Almost there." Their support gave her a final surge of energy that carried her the remaining distance to safety. As she collapsed behind cover with Davis, Sarah realized she had accomplished something that seemed impossible just hours earlier. She had single-handedly moved 3 wounded soldiers to safety while under heavy enemy fire, despite being the smallest member of the patrol. "Medical evacuation helicopter inbound," Thompson announced, 2 minutes out. The helicopter pilot had found an alternative landing zone about 200 meters from their current position, but getting there would require moving all 3 wounded soldiers again, this time while enemy fighters were preparing for a final assault on their position. "We'll have to carry them," Thompson decided. "Each wounded soldier needs 2 bearers." Sarah looked at the remaining unwounded members of the patrol. Including herself, there were only 5 soldiers capable of carrying the wounded. With 3 casualties requiring 2 bearers each, they were 1 person short. "I can carry 1 by myself," Sarah volunteered, her voice hoarse from exhaustion but still determined. "Chen, you've done enough," Lieutenant Thompson said firmly. "You can't carry a wounded soldier 200 meters. "Actually, sir, I think I can," Sarah replied, surprising herself with her confidence. The enemy ground assault was beginning in earnest now, with armed fighters advancing to within 100 meters of their position. The patrol had to move immediately, or risk being overrun. There was no time for debate or alternative planning. Sarah positioned herself at Davis's head, while 2 other soldiers took his feet and midsection. Jackson was carried by Kelly and another soldier, while Martinez was supported by Thompson and the remaining patrol member. They began moving toward the evacuation zone as fast as the wounded soldiers' conditions would allow. The 200-meter movement to the helicopter landing zone became a running battle. Enemy fighters pursued them across the rocky terrain, firing continuously while the Americans tried to return fire without dropping their wounded comrades. Sarah found herself not just carrying her share of Davis's weight, but also providing security for the group when possible. The medical evacuation helicopter appeared over the ridge just as the patrol reached the landing zone. The pilot brought his aircraft down in a cloud of dust and debris, while his door gunners provided covering fire against the pursuing enemy fighters. Loading the wounded soldiers into the helicopter required speed and precision. Sarah helped transfer each patient while providing the helicopter's medical crew with vital information about their injuries and the treatment they had already received. Her detailed reports would be crucial for the advanced medical care the soldiers would receive. As the helicopter lifted off with its precious cargo, Sarah felt a profound sense of relief and accomplishment. She had faced the ultimate test of her abilities and had not just succeeded, but had exceeded everyone's expectations, including her own. The return journey to base took several hours, as the patrol had to avoid enemy positions and call for additional support. But the immediate danger was over, and 3 soldiers were alive because of Sarah's courage and determination. During the long walk back, Sarah had time to reflect on what had happened. She had always known she was capable of more than people gave her credit for, but even she had been surprised by her performance under extreme pressure. She had found reserves of strength and courage she didn't know existed. Private Martinez, despite his wounds, walked alongside Sarah for part of the journey back. "Doc, I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I was wrong about you. Dead wrong." "You don't owe me anything," Sarah replied. "You were just looking out for your fellow soldiers. I respect that." "No, it was more than that. I let my assumptions about your size cloud my judgment about your abilities. That was unfair and potentially dangerous. You saved my life today, and Jackson's and Davis's too. I won't forget that." As they approached the base, word of their mission had already spread. The helicopter crew had reported what they had witnessed, and everyone was talking about the tiny medic who had single-handedly rescued 3 wounded soldiers under enemy fire. Sarah found herself the center of attention in a way that made her uncomfortable. But she also realized that something fundamental had changed. The doubts that had followed her throughout her military career were gone. She had proven beyond any question that size, gender, and physical appearance had nothing to do with courage, competence, or effectiveness under pressure. More importantly, she had proven it to herself. Colonel Williams was waiting when the patrol returned to base. As the soldiers reported for debriefing, he pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "Chen, I've received some interesting reports about your performance today," he said, his tone revealing nothing about his thoughts. "Yes, sir. I did what needed to be done. Finally, according to Lieutenant Thompson's preliminary report, you made multiple trips across open ground under enemy fire to treat wounded soldiers, then single-handedly moved all 3 to safety before helping carry them to the evacuation zone. Is that accurate?" "That's correct, sir." Williams studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "Chen, in 30 years of military service, I've rarely seen that level of courage and determination. You've set a new standard for what it means to be a combat medic." Sarah didn't know how to respond to such high praise, so she simply said, "Thank you, sir. I was just doing my job." "No, you weren't just doing your job. You went far beyond the call of duty. There will be paperwork to fill out, awards to consider, and reports to write. But right now, I want you to know that every soldier on this base, myself included, has enormous respect for what you accomplished today." As Sarah walked back to her quarters that evening, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this point. From being dismissed as too small and weak to be an effective medic, she had become a hero whose actions would be talked about and remembered long after her tour of duty ended. But more than the recognition or respect of others, Sarah had gained something even more valuable: absolute confidence in her own abilities and worth. She had faced the ultimate test, and had not just passed, but had excelled in ways that seemed impossible. The young woman who had arrived at the base months earlier as an uncertain, underestimated medic was gone. In her place was a confident, proven combat veteran who knew exactly what she was capable of achieving. The transformation was complete, but the story was far from over. The news of Sarah's heroic actions spread through the military base like wildfire. Within hours of the patrol's return, every soldier, officer, and support staff member had heard about the tiny medic who had saved 3 lives under enemy fire. The mess hall buzzed with conversations about her courage, and soldiers who had never spoken to her before nodded respectfully when they passed her in the corridors. But Sarah found the sudden attention overwhelming and somewhat uncomfortable. She had always preferred to work quietly and let her actions speak for themselves. Now, everywhere she went, people stared at her with a mixture of admiration and curiosity, as if trying to figure out how someone so small could have accomplished something so extraordinary. The first challenge came when she tried to return to her normal duties in the medical tent. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had recovered from his stomach illness, was waiting for her with a broad smile and a new perspective on his small medic. "Chen, I've been doing combat medicine for 20 years, and I've never heard of anyone doing what you did yesterday," he said as she reported for duty. 3 wounded soldiers carried 6,000 meters under fire by someone who weighs 110 pounds. It's going to be in the textbooks. "I hope not, Sergeant. I'd rather just get back to normal medical duties." Rodriguez laughed. "Normal? Chen, there's nothing normal about you anymore. You've set a new standard for what combat medics can accomplish." The medical tent felt different now. The other medics and corpsmen treated Sarah with a new level of respect that bordered on awe. When they discussed medical procedures and emergency protocols, they asked for her opinions and listened carefully to her responses. She had become the expert on combat medicine under extreme conditions. But the biggest change was in how the regular soldiers treated her. Men who had previously questioned her abilities now sought her out to tell their own stories and ask for medical advice. Private Martinez, whose leg was healing well, became one of her strongest advocates, telling anyone who would listen about how she had saved his life. "That little medic has more courage than half the soldiers in this battalion," he would say repeatedly. "I watched her run through enemy fire 3 times to reach wounded soldiers." 3 times! I wouldn't have had the guts to do it once. The transformation in attitudes was perhaps most dramatically illustrated by Corporal Jackson, who had initially been one of her harshest critics. When he was released from the field hospital and returned to base, he sought out Sarah immediately. "Doc, I need to say something to you," he said, finding her in the medical tent during a quiet moment. "I was wrong about you. Dead wrong. I thought your size made you a liability. But I've learned that size has nothing to do with heart." "You don't need to apologize, Jackson. You were just concerned about your fellow soldiers." "No, it was more than concern. It was prejudice, plain and simple. I made assumptions based on how you looked instead of judging you by your actions and abilities. That was unfair, and I'm sorry." Sarah appreciated his honesty, but she was more interested in moving forward than dwelling on past doubts. What matters is that we're all here and healthy. Let's focus on that. Colonel Williams called Sarah to his office 3 days after the mission for a more detailed discussion about what had happened and its implications. The colonel had received reports from multiple sources, including the helicopter crew that had evacuated the wounded soldiers, and he was trying to piece together the full story. "Chen, I've been reviewing the timeline and logistics of your actions during the mission," Williams began, consulting several documents on his desk. "According to these reports, you moved 3 wounded soldiers a total distance of approximately 6,000 meters while under enemy fire. Is that calculation accurate?" Sarah thought about the question carefully. "Sir, if you're including the multiple trips to reach each wounded soldier, plus moving them to the defensive position, plus helping carry them to the evacuation zone, then yes. That distance sounds about right. And you accomplished this while carrying medical equipment and providing treatment to each wounded soldier?" "I treated their wounds while under fire, then moved them when the tactical situation required it." Williams leaned back in his chair, still trying to fully comprehend what his small medic had accomplished. "Chen, I've been in the military for 3 decades. I've seen acts of courage and heroism that most people couldn't imagine. But what you did goes beyond anything in my experience. I just did what needed to be done, sir. Any other medic would have done the same thing." "No, Chen, that's where you're wrong. What you did required not just medical skill and courage, but also physical capabilities that frankly shouldn't have been possible given your size. You've challenged everything we think we know about physical limitations and human performance." The colonel's comments reflected a broader discussion that was taking place throughout the military about Sarah's actions. Medical and training experts were trying to understand how someone of her size had been able to drag and carry wounded soldiers weighing nearly twice as much as she did. Some suggested that adrenaline alone could account for her enhanced strength, while others pointed to technique and determination as more important factors than raw physical power. Dr. Patricia Myers, the base's senior medical officer, was particularly interested in understanding the physiological aspects of Sarah's performance. She had reviewed the mission reports and was amazed by what she read. "Medic Chen," Dr. Myers said during a consultation session, "I'd like to discuss some aspects of your performance during the rescue mission, if you don't mind." "Of course, ma'am." "According to the reports, you were able to drag unconscious soldiers weighing between 170 and 200 pounds across rough terrain while under enemy fire. From a purely physical standpoint, that should have been impossible given your body weight and muscle mass." Sarah considered the doctor's observations. "Ma'am, I honestly don't know how I did it. At the time, I wasn't thinking about whether it was possible or impossible. I just knew that soldiers were wounded and needed help. That's precisely what interests me. You've demonstrated that in extreme situations, determination and training can overcome apparent physical limitations. Your case is going to be studied in military medical schools for years to come." But Sarah was less interested in becoming a case study than in continuing to serve as an effective combat medic. She had proven her capabilities beyond any doubt, but she still had a job to do, and soldiers depending on her medical skills. Her next test came sooner than expected. 2 weeks after the mountain mission, Sarah was assigned to accompany another patrol into a different area where intelligence reports suggested enemy activity. This time, however, the dynamics were completely different. Lieutenant Morrison, who was leading this patrol, had specifically requested Sarah as his medic. "I want the best," he had told Colonel Williams. "And from what I've heard, Chen is the best we have." The other soldiers in the patrol had also heard about Sarah's heroic actions, and their attitude toward her was dramatically different from what she had experienced on her first mission. Instead of skepticism and doubt, she encountered respect and confidence. The soldiers trusted her completely and looked to her not just for medical support, but for leadership and inspiration. Sergeant Collins, a veteran of multiple combat tours, expressed the general sentiment during their pre-mission briefing. "Ma'am, it's an honor to serve with you. Everyone here knows what you accomplished on that mountain, and we want you to know that we've got your back." Sarah was touched by the sentiment, but also felt the pressure of heightened expectations. Her previous mission had been successful, but she knew that every future mission would be measured against that standard. She couldn't afford to let her fellow soldiers down. The new mission took the patrol into a valley region, where enemy forces had been interdicting supply convoys. Their job was to locate and eliminate the enemy positions, a task that would require careful coordination and potentially dangerous close combat. As they moved through the terrain, Sarah noticed that her role within the patrol had evolved beyond that of a traditional medic. The other soldiers frequently asked for her opinions on tactical matters and looked to her for reassurance during difficult moments. Her proven courage had given her an informal leadership role that extended well beyond medical responsibilities. The patrol encountered enemy resistance earlier than expected. While moving through a narrow canyon, they came under fire from concealed positions in the rocks above. The enemy had chosen their ambush site well, and the patrol found themselves pinned down with limited options for maneuvering. "Medic up front," Lieutenant Morrison called as soon as the shooting started. "We may need you mobile if anyone gets hit." Sarah moved forward to a position where she could observe the entire patrol and respond quickly to any casualties. But as the firefight continued, she realized she was doing more than just waiting for wounded soldiers. She was actively participating in the tactical decision-making process. "Lieutenant," she called over the gunfire, "there's a covered route along the left side of the canyon that might allow a flanking movement." Morrison looked where she was pointing and immediately saw the tactical opportunity she had identified. "Good eye, Chen. Collins, take 2 men and see if you can work around their flank." The flanking movement was successful, and the patrol was able to eliminate the enemy position without suffering any casualties. But what impressed Morrison most was how naturally Sarah had transitioned from medic to tactical advisor. Her combat experience and proven judgment made her a valuable contributor to the patrol's overall effectiveness. After the engagement, Morrison pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "Chen, I've served with a lot of medics over the years, but I've never seen one with your combination of medical skills and tactical awareness. You've got natural leadership abilities." "Thank you, sir, but I'm just trying to do my job effectively. Your job has evolved, whether you realize it or not. These soldiers look up to you now. Your actions on that mountain have made you more than just a medic. You've become a symbol of what's possible when someone refuses to accept limitations." Morrison's observations were accurate. Sarah had noticed that soldiers throughout the base were beginning to treat her differently. Younger medics sought her advice and mentorship. Experienced soldiers asked for her opinions on various matters. Even officers consulted with her on medical and tactical issues. The transformation was perhaps most evident during training exercises. When new medics arrived at the base, they were inevitably told the story of Sarah's heroic actions. She had become a legend within the military medical community, and new medics studied her techniques and tried to emulate her approach to combat medicine. But with recognition came new challenges. Sarah found herself under constant scrutiny, with every action and decision analyzed by others looking for lessons or insights. The pressure to maintain her reputation and continue performing at an exceptional level was enormous. During one particularly difficult training exercise, a young medic named Private Foster was struggling with the physical demands of carrying wounded soldiers during evacuation drills. Foster was similar to Sarah in size and had joined the military, partly inspired by her example. "I thought I could do what you did," Foster confided to Sarah after a particularly challenging training session. "But I can barely carry my medical pack, let alone a wounded soldier." Sarah recognized the frustration and self-doubt in Foster's voice. It reminded her of her own early struggles and the pressure she had felt to prove herself capable. "Foster, don't try to be me," Sarah advised gently. "You need to be the best version of yourself. My situation was unique, and what I accomplished was the result of specific circumstances and training. Your job is to develop your own abilities and find your own way to serve effectively. But everyone expects medics to be able to do what you did. No, they expect medics to save lives and provide excellent medical care. How you accomplish that will be unique to you and your situation. Focus on becoming the best medic you can be, not on trying to replicate someone else's actions." Sarah realized that her success had created unrealistic expectations for other medics, particularly smaller soldiers, who thought they needed to duplicate her physical accomplishments to be considered effective. She began working with training instructors to ensure that her story was presented as inspiration rather than an impossible standard that others had to match. The conversation with Foster also made Sarah reflect on her own journey and how much had changed since her arrival at the base. She had transformed from an uncertain, underestimated medic into a confident leader whose opinions were sought and valued throughout the unit. But more importantly, she had learned that true strength came not from physical size or power, but from determination, skill, and an unwillingness to give up when others were depending on you. Her small stature, which had once seemed like a disadvantage, had actually been an asset in many situations. As she prepared for her next mission, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction with how far she had come. She had not only proven her doubters wrong, but had exceeded her own expectations of what she could accomplish. The journey from weak medic to respected leader had been challenging, but it had revealed strengths and capabilities she never knew she possessed. The young woman who had once worried about carrying a heavy medical pack was now someone that experienced soldiers trusted with their lives. The transformation was complete, but Sarah knew that each new mission would bring fresh challenges and opportunities to serve her fellow soldiers with courage and distinction. 6 months after her heroic mountain rescue, Sarah Chen had become more than just a medic at Forward Operating Base Kilo. She was now the senior enlisted medical advisor, a role that placed her in charge of training all new medics and developing medical protocols for the entire base. The transformation from doubted newcomer to respected leader was complete, but her most important mission still lay ahead. The base had received intelligence about a major enemy offensive planned for the region. Multiple battalions of hostile forces were reportedly moving into position for coordinated attacks on several American outposts. Base Kilo would likely be one of their primary targets, and everyone was preparing for the largest battle the base had ever faced. Colonel Williams called a staff meeting to discuss defensive preparations and assign responsibilities for the upcoming engagement. Sarah found herself sitting at the main planning table alongside company commanders and senior officers, her input considered essential for medical planning and casualty evacuation procedures. Based on intelligence reports, we can expect heavy casualties, Williams announced grimly. The enemy is bringing significant firepower, and they're planning a sustained assault that could last several days. Our medical facilities will be tested beyond anything we've experienced. Sarah studied the tactical maps and enemy strength estimates with growing concern. The projected casualty figures were sobering, and she realized that her medical team would face challenges that would dwarf even the mountain rescue that had made her famous. Sir, our current medical facilities can handle maybe 20 serious casualties at one time, Sarah reported. If these intelligence estimates are accurate, we could see double or triple that number in the first few hours of fighting. What do you recommend, Chen? Williams asked, valuing her practical experience and proven judgment. We need to establish multiple casualty collection points around the base perimeter. Instead of trying to bring all wounded to the central medical facility, we should position medical teams at forward locations where they can provide immediate treatment and stabilize patients for evacuation. Her recommendations were adopted immediately, and Sarah found herself responsible for coordinating medical support across the entire base defense. It was a massive responsibility that would test not just her medical skills, but her leadership abilities and strategic thinking. Over the next week, Sarah worked 18-hour days preparing for the expected battle. She established forward aid stations at key defensive positions, trained additional soldiers in basic medical procedures, and stockpiled medical supplies at strategic locations around the base. Her small medical team had grown into a coordinated network of medics, corpsmen, and trained soldiers capable of handling mass casualties. Private Foster, the young medic who had struggled during training, had become one of Sarah's most reliable assistants. Under Sarah's mentorship, Foster had developed into a competent medic who specialized in trauma surgery assistance. Her confidence had grown enormously, and she no longer felt pressured to duplicate Sarah's specific heroic actions. "Ma'am, the forward aid stations are fully stocked and staffed," Foster reported during one of their evening preparation meetings. "Each position has at least 2 qualified medics and enough supplies for 50 casualties. Good work, Foster. Remember, when the fighting starts, your job is to save lives, not to be a hero. Leave the heroics to others and focus on being the best medic you can be." Sarah's approach to leadership was based on the lessons she had learned about playing to individual strengths rather than trying to force everyone into the same mold. She had seen too many soldiers fail because they were trying to be something they weren't instead of excelling at what they could do well. The enemy attack began at dawn on a Tuesday morning with a massive artillery barrage that shook the entire base. Sarah was in the central medical facility when the first shells began falling, and she immediately knew that all their preparation was about to be tested in the most demanding way possible. "All medical teams, this is medical control," she radioed to the forward aid stations. "The attack has begun. Prepare for immediate casualties." The enemy artillery was more intense and accurate than intelligence reports had predicted. Several defensive positions took direct hits in the first few minutes, and casualty reports began streaming in over the radio network. Sarah found herself coordinating medical responses across the entire base while also treating the wounded soldiers being brought to her central facility. "Medical control, this is Aid Station 2, came the first urgent radio call. "We have 8 casualties from a direct artillery hit. 3 urgent, 5 routine. Request immediate evacuation support. Aid Station 2, this is medical control. Evacuation helicopter is 10 minutes out. Continue treatment and prepare for pickup." But the helicopter evacuation that Sarah was counting on never arrived. Enemy anti-aircraft fire had made helicopter operations too dangerous, and the medical evacuation aircraft had been forced to withdraw to safer areas. Sarah realized that all seriously wounded soldiers would have to be transported to higher-level medical facilities by ground convoy, a much slower and more dangerous process. The situation deteriorated rapidly as enemy ground forces began their assault on the base perimeter. Fighting was taking place at multiple locations simultaneously, and casualties were mounting faster than the medical teams could handle them. Sarah found herself making the same type of impossible decisions she had faced during the mountain rescue, but now on a much larger scale. "Medical control, Aid Station 4 is being overrun," reported Sergeant Martinez, who had recovered from his mountain wounds and was now leading one of the forward medical teams. "We have 6 wounded soldiers who can't be moved. Request immediate support." Sarah assessed the tactical situation quickly. Aid Station 4 was in an exposed position that was taking heavy enemy fire. The medics there were trapped with wounded soldiers who were too seriously injured to evacuate safely. Someone would have to reach them and either reinforce their position or help evacuate the casualties. "Martinez, hold your position. Help is coming," Sarah radioed back, already planning her response. But help meant Sarah herself. All other medical teams were already fully committed to handling casualties at their own positions. The base's reaction force was engaged in defending critical positions and couldn't be spared for a rescue mission. Sarah was the only person available who had both the medical expertise and the proven courage to reach the trapped medics. Colonel Williams tried to stop her when he learned of her plan. "Chen, you're too valuable to risk on a rescue mission. We need you here coordinating medical support for the entire base." "Sir, there are wounded soldiers who will die without immediate medical attention. I have to go. Take a squad with you for security." "No, sir. A larger group would be easier to spot and target. I can move faster and more quietly alone." Sarah's decision to attempt the rescue alone was based on the same tactical thinking that had served her well during the mountain rescue. Her small size allowed her to move through dangerous areas without being easily detected, and her proven ability to work under pressure made her the logical choice for the mission. She gathered essential medical supplies and prepared to cross nearly a mile of contested ground to reach Aid Station 4. The route would take her through areas where enemy and American forces were actively engaged, requiring her to avoid both friendly and enemy fire, while carrying enough medical equipment to treat multiple serious casualties. The journey to Aid Station 4 became a terrifying game of cat and mouse through a battlefield. Sarah had to crawl through drainage ditches, sprint across open areas between buildings, and hide in whatever cover she could find while enemy soldiers searched for American targets. Several times she came within feet of enemy fighters who were moving through the base perimeter. Her small size, which had once been seen as a disadvantage, proved to be a crucial asset. She could hide in spaces too small for larger soldiers and move through areas without being noticed. What should have been a suicide mission became a careful but successful infiltration through enemy lines. When Sarah finally reached Aid Station 4, she found Martinez and his medical team trapped in a partially collapsed bunker, with 6 seriously wounded soldiers. Enemy fire had damaged their radio, cutting off communication with the rest of the base, and they had been fighting off periodic enemy assaults while trying to treat the wounded. "Doc, how did you get here?" Martinez asked in amazement as Sarah crawled into the damaged bunker. "Very carefully. What's the situation with the casualties?" Martinez briefed her on each wounded soldier's condition while enemy bullets continued to crack overhead. 3 of the soldiers had life-threatening injuries that required immediate surgery, while the others had serious wounds that would become critical without proper treatment. Sarah realized immediately that the wounded soldiers couldn't be moved in their current condition. They needed stabilization procedures that would take time and require her full concentration, all while under enemy fire in a partially destroyed bunker. "Martinez, I need you and your team to hold security while I work on these soldiers. This is going to take a while." For the next 4 hours, Sarah performed combat medicine under the most extreme conditions imaginable, working by flashlight in a cramped, damaged bunker while enemy forces attacked repeatedly. She managed to stabilize all 6 wounded soldiers and prepare them for eventual evacuation. Her most challenging case was Specialist Brooks, who had suffered massive blood loss from a shrapnel wound to his femoral artery. Under normal circumstances, Brooks would have died within minutes of his injury. But Sarah managed to control the bleeding and perform emergency vascular surgery using improvised tools and techniques she had never attempted outside of training scenarios. "Brooks is stable for now," she reported to Martinez after completing the procedure, "but he needs proper surgery within the next few hours or he won't make it." The tactical situation around the base was gradually improving as American reinforcements arrived and began pushing back the enemy assault. But Aid Station 4 remained cut off from friendly lines, and Sarah faced the same challenge she had encountered during the mountain rescue, getting wounded soldiers to safety while under enemy fire. This time, however, the distances were much greater, and the number of casualties was larger. She would have to move 6 wounded soldiers approximately 1 mile through contested territory to reach safety. Even with help from Martinez and his team, it seemed like an impossible task. The solution came from an unexpected source. Private Foster, monitoring radio communications from the Central Medical Facility, had been tracking Sarah's mission and realized the magnitude of the challenge she faced. Foster organized a rescue convoy using all available vehicles and personnel not directly engaged in combat operations. "Medical control. This is Rescue Convoy 1, Foster radioed. We're moving to extract Aid Station 4. Have wounded ready for immediate loading." Sarah felt enormous pride in Foster's initiative and leadership. The young medic who had once doubted her own abilities was now organizing complex medical evacuations and taking charge when the situation demanded it. The convoy's arrival allowed Sarah and Martinez's team to load all 6 wounded soldiers and begin the dangerous journey back to the main base. Sarah rode with the most seriously injured casualties, continuing to provide medical treatment during the evacuation, while the convoy fought its way through sporadic enemy resistance. Brooks, the soldier with the arterial injury, went into shock twice during the evacuation. Each time, Sarah managed to resuscitate him and keep him alive until they could reach proper surgical facilities. Her improvised field surgery had bought him the time he needed, but barely. When the convoy finally reached the Central Medical Facility, Sarah had been awake and working for nearly 20 hours straight. She was exhausted, dehydrated, and running on pure adrenaline and determination, but she had successfully rescued an entire medical team and saved 6 soldiers who would have died without her intervention. Dr. Myers was waiting when the wounded soldiers arrived at the medical facility. As Sarah helped transfer Brooks to the surgical table, the doctor marveled at the quality of field treatment the soldier had received. "Chen, this vascular repair is textbook perfect. You performed arterial surgery in a combat zone using improvised instruments. How is that even possible?" "I just did what needed to be done, ma'am. Brooks is a good soldier. He deserved every chance we could give him." All 6 soldiers that Sarah had treated at Aid Station 4 survived their injuries and eventually returned to duty. Brooks required additional surgery to fully repair his arterial damage, but doctors confirmed that Sarah's field procedure had been flawless and had definitely saved his life. The battle for Base Kilo continued for 3 more days, But Sarah's rescue of Aid Station 4 proved to be the turning point. Her successful mission demonstrated that American forces could operate effectively even when cut off from support, and it provided a crucial medical capability that kept more wounded soldiers alive during the prolonged fighting. When the enemy forces finally withdrew, casualty statistics showed that Base Kilo had achieved the lowest death rate of any American position attacked during the offensive. Medical experts attributed this success directly to Sarah's innovative medical deployment and her personal heroism during the most critical moments of the battle. Colonel Williams called Sarah to his office for a final evaluation before her tour of duty ended. She was scheduled to return to the United States in 2 weeks, and there was significant discussion about her next assignment and potential promotion. "Chen, your performance during this deployment has been extraordinary by any measure," Williams began. "You've redefined what it means to be a combat medic, and have proven that courage and determination matter more than physical size or conventional expectations. Thank you, sir. It's been an honor to serve with these soldiers. The honor has been ours. I've recommended you for the Medal of Honor for your actions during the mountain rescue, and for the Silver Star for your rescue of Aid Station 4. You've earned every bit of recognition you're going to receive." And Sarah was honored by the recognition, but she was more satisfied by the knowledge that her actions had saved lives and proven that anyone could exceed expectations if they were willing to work hard and never give up. Her final week at Base Kilo was filled with farewells and expressions of gratitude from soldiers whose lives she had touched. The young woman who had arrived as an uncertain, underestimated medic was leaving as a proven leader whose example would inspire others for years to come. Private Foster approached her on her last day at the base with a request that perfectly captured how much had changed during Sarah's deployment. "Ma'am, would you mind signing my medical manual? I want to remember what you taught me about being a medic." "FO, you've become an excellent medic in your own right.